All right, so this Shabbat, we're going to be in the Torah portion called Korach, or Korah in English. Now, Korah was part of the Levites, and he was the head of this coup d'etat against Moses and Aaron. And so that's kind of what this is about this week. So it's in Numbers chapter 16. So that's where we're going to be starting. So as you're turning there, I'm going to go ahead and recite the blessing over the reading of the Torah. Baruch Adonai Hamvarak. Blessed is Adonai, the Blessed One. Baruch Adonai Hamvarak Leolam Vayed. Blessed is Adonai, the Blessed One, for all eternity. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'neten lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai, noten ha'torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has selected us from all peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord, giver of the Torah. And as it says in Psalm 119:18, let this be our prayer. Open my eyes, that I might behold wondrous things out of your Torah. So in Numbers chapter 16, I've got a lot of passages. Some of them I'll read, some of them I won't. But probably not many of you, except for maybe just a couple of us, are combat sports fans. I love boxing. I love kickboxing. I love mixed martial arts. I love to see two guys go at it consensually. And, usually there's 3 rounds in a fight. In just a regular run-of-the-mill fight, there's 3 rounds. And usually those rounds, those fights aren't too serious. It's just to kind of get up in the ranking, kind of thing. Then you have the 5-round fights. The 5 rounds are, usually for a title, for a belt, for accolades, for being the best in your division and in your weight class. So we kind of see here in Numbers chapter 16 that this could be compared to a 4 rounds of a 5-round fight. So we see Moses and Aaron go 4 rounds with various opponents. And the 4th and the 5th round are called the championship rounds. That's, really when you see and you can kind of determine who's going to win the fight. And instead of going 5 rounds, they only go 4. But at the end of it all, there's only one champion that's left standing, and that's Moses and Aaron. And so remember, this come right on the heels of another rebellion. This come right on the heels of the children of Israel saying, "No way, Jose! We're not going to go into the promised land. There's giants in the land. We look like grasshoppers to ourselves. Imagine how small we look to them." And Joshua and Caleb were the only ones that said, no, wait a minute, guys. God is with us. He promised to give this land to us. All we got to do is take it. We can take these guys. But they said no. And the Lord said, fine. For the 40 days they were spying out the land, it's going to be a year for each day. You turn your butts back around and you start wandering around in a circle in the wilderness until all of you who doubted this die. Except for Joshua and Caleb. They're going to see the promised land. And your children, who you said will be captives to these giants, they're going to inherit the land. So it was right after this rebellion. And they tried to backpedal and say, okay, God, we're sorry. We'll go and fight. No, too late. You already crossed the line. No. Well, see, we're strapping on our armor. We're getting our swords on. We'll go. No. But they went anyway and got their butts kicked. So it's right after this, and here they decide to rebel again. Stiff-necked, hard-headed, hard-hearted, and we put down the children of Israel, and we're just the same way. We're just as conniving, we're just as rebellious as they are, or as they were. And, we think to ourselves, well, if I was one of the children of Israel and I saw these miracles, I wouldn't doubt. Oh, yeah? Well, I've seen God do quite a lot of great things in my life and the life of others, and I still doubt. So it says in Numbers chapter 16... Everybody else is there but me. I'm sitting here gabbing. All right, so Numbers chapter 16, it says, Now Korah, son of Izhar, son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and the sons of Reuben, Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth. So here the Bible is calling out the ones that are responsible for this rebellion, for this attempted coup d'etat. They're the ones, they're the villains, they're the heels in the wrestling world that takes the microphone and is calling the other guy out. Yeah, you think you're great. You think you're a champion. We're going to take you on. We're going to demolish you. You just pick the time and the place. So they're challenging Moses and Aaron. Now, if you go to 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 27 through 29, it kind of really spells out the lineage here. And we're not going to go into that, but if you're interested, I just wanted to throw that out there. But you have several people involved in this rebellion. You have Korach, who was a Levite. And he was actually cousins with Moses and Aaron. Now, we know Moses was sort of like the king. He was sort of like the leader. And he kind of ran things. Aaron, his older brother, was the high priest. And you had Miriam, which she was the prophetess. She was the worship leader, but she was also the water scout, as we will, discover later on in the scriptures. And it seemed like this family ran the entire show. So it seemed like there was favoritism here, but there wasn't, because Moses, Aaron, and Miriam were ordained and called by God to do what they were doing. And the people wanted to say, no, you kind of took over. You just kind of like put this title upon yourself. When indeed it was God who actually chose them. But it seems like favoritism here, because Moses is the leader, Aaron is second in command, he's basically the high priest, and then you have all the other Levites, which were all the cousins, and they had the menial tasks of dismantling and carrying the tabernacle. You had one tribe who carried all the posts and the stakes and the cords and the rings, and then you had another tribe who carried all the fabrics, the skins, the coverings, the tent, and then you had Korah, who was part of the tribe of Kohath, and he had the most prestigious job out of them all. His clan carried the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, the brazen altar, the laver, the menorah. All of these furnishings they carried. They kind of had, a classy, prominent, respectable job among the clans. Oh, well, you just get to carry the post and the rings. We get to carry the furniture, But that wasn't enough for Korah. That wasn't enough for them. So the Kohathites, a Levitical clan, they were responsible for carrying the holy furnishings, the ark, the menorah, the altars, table for showbread, the laver, etc. We can find that in Numbers chapter 4. Now, it's interesting that we see Korah conspiring with Dathan and Abiram, which were of the tribe of Reuben. Now, actually, if you want to go by genealogy and stuff, Korah should have been some sort of prominent leader, because he was kind of like a firstborn, but yet there was other people who kind of leapfrogged him into leadership, and I think Korah was jealous because of that. Then you had the children of Reuben, who were jealous because they were the firstborn. Their patriarch, their father, was Reuben. He was the firstborn, but he forfeited his rights as firstborn by sleeping with Bilhah, Jacob's handmaid. And so the rest of the children of Israel could have been priests. All of the firstborn of Israel, of all the tribes, could have been priests, but they forfeited their rights to the priesthood because they worshiped the golden calf. It was only the tribe of Levi says, we're not going to worship the golden calf. That's why the Lord gave them the priesthood and separated them out of all the other tribes of Israel to be the tribe that were the priests. Now, Korah and his clan of the Kohathites camped right in front of Reuben on the south side of the tabernacle. You had the different clans of the Levites that encamped round about the tabernacle to protect the tabernacle, to keep a safe boundary between the holy things and the common people of the other tribes of Israel. And then, you had these Levitical clans that did all the work to assist Aaron and his sons as high priests to do the jobs and all this. So you had the Kohathites and Korah who camped to the south, and right behind them was Reuben. So they were neighbors. So they were chummy. They were buddies. So that's kind of a commentary and a testimony that we need to be careful of who we associate with, who we move around, and who we, camp near, and who we are neighbors to. Because like it or not, neighbors are going to have an influence on you. Especially if there are more of them than of you, and they were more Reubenites than they were of Kohathites. And so we see that they both kind of had a bad influence on each other. And I think it says in 1 Corinthians that bad company corrupts good morals. So Dathan and Abiram, according to tradition, are said to be the ones that ratted Moses out when he killed the Egyptian. Remember, he saw that Egyptian taskmaster beating on a Hebrew. He says, "Not on my watch. These are my people. He looked around, made sure nobody was looking, and he killed that Egyptian taskmaster and buried him in the sand. And then the next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting, and it was Dathan and Abiram according to tradition. They're sitting there duking it out, yelling at each other, in each other's faces, about ready to tear each other apart. Moses is like, brothers, why are you fighting against yourself? And one of them said, who do you think you are? Who made you prince and ruler over us? Are you going to kill us like you killed that Egyptian? So they were said to be the ones that ratted Moses out to Pharaoh, which caused Moses to have to go on the run. So Dathan and Abiram were bad eggs, rotten apples from the start. They were the constant instigators and troublemakers that were always complaining and causing riots and causing the gossip and causing all the disruption in the children of Israel. And then you had this other guy, and he was On, son of Peleth. Now it's interesting, On is not a Hebrew name. So it kind of makes you wonder who this On of Peleth was, because On means the sun. It was the sun god of Egypt. So, apparently it kind of seems because of his apparent Egyptian name that maybe his parents were kind of assimilated. They were more pagan, more Egyptian than they were Hebrew, than they were Israelite. So it was these guys that were the ringleaders that brought, in verse 2, it says, they rose up against Moses and took 250 men from the children of Israel, Bnei Israel, men of renown who had been appointed to the council. So to give their rebellion a little bit more legitimacy, a little bit more clout, they got 250 elders and leaders of the children of Israel. Now, it's interesting, men of renown. This is the same phraseology that we find in Genesis 6 talking about the Nephilim. The giants, they were men of renown. They were men of power. They were men of reputation. So it's interesting. It's kind of a hint that these 250 elders are kind of linked to the rebellious Nephilim giants in Genesis 6 by that word, men of renown. So it's not really a compliment to them. So this is a significant rebellion. We're not just talking about one or two people that are bellyaching and complaining. We're talking about a pretty large number and some authoritative people that were rebelling against Moses and Aaron. So we have basically these things come on the heels of events that went down the memory hole. You know what I mean when I say they go down the memory hole? Something happens and it's significant and we're supposed to learn a lesson from it. And then a couple weeks later, we totally forget about it. It happens on the news all the time. There's something big and explosive and earth-shattering that's on the news 1 week. A couple weeks later, there's something else, and what was on the week before is totally forgotten about. It's as if it never happened or didn't exist, and it goes down the memory hole. And what is said on the news this week contradicts what was said on the news a couple weeks ago. But nobody remembers because it went down the memory hole. So this rebellion, this 4-round fighting rebellion, comes on the heels of 5 events, other rebellions that just went down the memory hole. You had the golden calf. Everybody kind of forgot about the golden calf. God was about ready to destroy the people because of the golden calf and make a nation out of Moses, and Moses interceded and saved their butts. Ground up the golden calf into powder, threw it in the water, and made the people drink the gold dust. You had the golden calf incident, where the children of Israel forfeited their right to be priests, the firstborn to be priests, and now it just went to the Levites. So now you have the Levites, but you have Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu. And they offered strange, unauthorized fire before the Lord. Zap! They were burnt to death. They were killed instantly. You had Aaron and Miriam, Moses' own brother and sister, conspiring against him. Oh, Moses thinks he's a big shot. Well, have you seen his Cushite wife that just came back into camp all of a sudden? And you had that rebellion. And what happened? Miriam developed leprosy as a result of that. Then you had the incident of the waters of Marah, the bitter waters. Oh, we're gonna die of thirst. There's no potable water to drink. And the Lord said, fine, just put this stick in the water and it'll be all right. And then it's like, oh, we don't have anything to eat. We're going to starve to death. Well, boo-hoo. I wish we were in Egypt where we could eat leeks and melons and have fish in abundance and blah, 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 blah. Fine, I'll give you manna and quail. And they had quail until it came out their nose. And there was a plague as a result because God was so angry with them. And then finally you had the episode of the 10 spies. And the 12 spies, and 10 of them gave an evil report, which convinced the entire nation not to obey God. But all this went down the memory hole because a new rebellion rose up. Now, as I said before, Reuben was the firstborn, but forfeited it by sleeping with Jacob's handmaid Bilhah. You had Korah, son of Izhar. He was the firstborn, but God chose Eliasphaz, son of Uzziel, over him, and he was the thirdborn. So Korah's like, this isn't right. This isn't part of our tradition. And then, as I said before, you had all the firstborn of the children of Israel forfeited their right to be a priest because of the golden calf incident. And this rebellion was trying to bring back all of that, where you had these 250 men from all different tribes of Israel wanting to be priests. You had Korach wanting to have the same authority as Aaron. So these rebellions of the golden calf, of Nadab and Abihu, Aaron and Miriam, the waters of Marah, the quail and the manna, and the 10 spies, these were all issues of leadership where either Moses or Aaron was vindicated by God. Because all of them said in this instance, we should be the leader, or somebody else should be the leader, or we need to go back to Egypt. Let's choose somebody else. And so either in these 5 incidences, either Moses or Aaron was vindicated, and God put his seal of approval upon them. So here we have another rebellion that's trying to challenge Moses and Aaron. So you have 4 rebellions, 4 rounds. And these are the 4 rounds. You have the Levites versus Aaron. Round 2, you have the firstborn versus Moses. Round 3, you have all of Israel versus Moses and Aaron. And finally, the 4th round, you have the tribal leaders versus Aaron. Now, I'll remind you what Exodus 22:27 says. Do not despise God or curse a ruler of your people. Psalm 105:15. Touch not mine anointed and do my prophets no harm. 1 Samuel 15:23. Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. And then finally, in Numbers 16:32, this is kind of the end result, and it doesn't end well. It says, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, along with all their household, and all of Korah's people, and all their possessions. When you rebel against God, it's never going to end well. When you rebel against his anointed ones, it's never going to end well. So let's check out round 1. Round 1, Levites versus Aaron. We find this in Numbers chapter 16, verses 1 through 22, and verses 35 through 40. So we're just going to touch on a few verses here. So verse 3 says, they assembled against Moses and Aaron, and they said to them, you've gone too far. All the community is holy, all of them. Adonai is with them. Then why do you exalt yourself above the assembly of Adonai? So Korah, Dathan and Abiram and On claim Moses and Aaron to be dictators. You're calling the shots. Who died and made you king? Who appointed you? That's what they're asking. They're saying, you have taken on too much. What do you mean taken on too much? God appointed and called Moses to deliver them from Egypt. And God called Aaron to be high priest. And God even said, okay, I'm going to get 70 elders to help carry the burden and the load of leadership. But that wasn't enough. So Korah is making this claim, you've gone too far. And he's not totally lying here. He says all the community is holy. Yes, all the community is holy because God took Israel, the 12 tribes, out of all the 70 nations of the world and said, this is going to be my special people. So out of the 12 tribes, 1 tribe was taken to be God's special priesthood, and that was the Levites. That's where Korah, that's where Dathan and Abiram went wrong. Sure, all the community was holy, all of them. But again, they forfeited their rights to all be priests because they worshiped the golden calf. So all the firstborn lost that right. And so it was just only given to the Levites. But yet even Korah, a Levite, wasn't content with his station, with the calling that God placed upon his life. So verse 4 says, when Moses heard this, he fell on his face. Does that mean that Moses got knocked out and the referee's going, 1, 2, he's down? No. Ding, ding. Okay, saved by the bell. Moses goes into his corner. When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. That was Moses' go-to. When he fell on his face, do you think he fell on his face and said, oh God, I'm so scared. Please save me from these bad men and these 250 guys. No, he didn't do that. Did Moses fall on his face and say, get him, Lord, sick him, get him, strike him down with lightning, Lord? No, he didn't do that either. He actually stood in the gap and says, God, these people have no idea what they're asking. They have no idea what they're doing. Please don't wipe them out. Please don't kill them. Please give them another chance. He was actually pleading for them. I don't know if I would have done that. I may have been more of the type to say, get them, Lord. Sick them, God. So you have verses 5 through 7. It says, then he said to Korah and all of his following, saying, in the morning, Adonai will reveal who is his and who is holy. And remember, all holy means is set apart by God. The one whom he will let come near to him will be the one he chooses to come near to him. Do this, Korah, and your whole following. Take for yourselves censers. Put fire and incense into them in the presence of Adonai. Tomorrow, the man that God chooses will be the holy one. You sons of Levi, see, he turns the tables where Korah was saying, you take too much upon yourself. Here Moses is saying, you sons of Levi are the ones who have gone too far. You're saying, I've gone too far. You've gone too far. This contest is a life or death proposition. It's a life or death situation because remember the last time people who were unauthorized that offered a censer full of incense, what happened to them? Yeah, God burned them and killed them with fire. Nadab and Abihu, and that was Aaron's own sons. God does not play favorites. So Korah's like, okay, sounds good to me. I'm confident I'm going to be the one that's left standing because I'm the firstborn. I'm the one who's older. I'm the one who deserves this. Reuben here, he and his crew deserves this because they're firstborn. They were passed by, and now Judah's the firstborn. What's the deal with that? So there was a forfeiting process of why these certain tribes lost their firstborn status and why Judah was chosen as the firstborn. See, Simon and Levi, they totally destroyed what people group? Anyway, they killed all that people, the Shechemites, that's it. Killed the people of Shechem. And that's why Simon and Levi, or Simeon and Levi, lost their rights as firstborn. I already explained to you why Reuben lost his right as firstborn, so it fell to Judah. So Moses throws Korah's accusation back in his face and tells him that he's the one who's gone too far. So here, starting with verse 8, it says, Moses also said to Korah, listen now, sons of Levi, isn't it enough that the God of Israel has set you apart from the community of Israel to bring you near to him, to do the work of the tabernacle of Adonai, and to stand before the community and minister to them? It wasn't enough for Korah and his sons to carry the holy furnishings. They didn't have to carry the tent. They didn't have to carry the post. They carried the very throne of God. God's throne on earth. What a privilege. But they weren't content with that. Verse 10, so he brought you close along with all your fellow sons of Levi, but you are seeking the priesthood too. It's just not enough. You're not happy and content with what God has called you to. Therefore, you and your following are banded together against Adonai. Who then is Aaron that you have grumbled against him? So he calls out Korah for not being content with the prestige God has given him. His clan was to transport the holy articles. And then you have verse 20 through 22, it says, then Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this assembly, so that I may consume them at once. But what did Moses and Aaron do? They fell on their faces and cried out, O God, God of the spirits of all flesh, if one man sins, will you be angry with the entire community? So, communal sin brings collective judgment. And Moses is asking God that the innocent be spared. Again, he's not saying, God, sick him. He's not saying, God, please save us so we don't be lynched. He's crying out on behalf of these people who are rebelling against him, who want to kill them and stone them and take over their position. That is why Moses is called the most humble man on the face of the earth in the scriptures. So you go to verse 35 through 40. Fire also came out from Adonai and consumed the 250 men offering incense. Just Nadab and Abihu, deja vu, all over again. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, tell Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen, that is the priest, to take the censers from the burning, because they are holy, and scatter the coals at a distance. As for the censers, these men who have sinned at the cost of their lives, let them be taken and hammered into sheets as coverings for the altar. For they were presented before Adonai, so they are holy. They are to be a sign to all of the children of Israel. So Eleazar the Kohen collected the bronze censers brought by the ones who were burned and hammered them into an overlay on the altar, just as Adonai had spoken to Moses by Moses' hand, so that it would be as a reminder to the children of Israel, Bnei Israel, that no one who is not of a descendant of Aaron should burn incense before Adonai, so no one would become like Korah and his following. Just imagine every time you went to the tabernacle to present your sacrifice to the Lord and you saw that brazen altar. Brass has always been symbolic of judgment. That's why a sacrifice takes place on the altar, is because God, through that sacrifice, is judging your sin. So imagine every time they saw these sheets of bronze, it's like, okay, oh yeah. What a memorial. Every time you went to the tabernacle and saw that bronze altar, you saw those sheets that were hammered on and said, oh, those belong to the 250 that rebelled, that were burned up by God. It's Aaron and only Aaron and his descendants that have the right to be the high priests. So what a memorial, a sobering reminder of not to rebel. God was constantly putting it before their face not to rebel. So how quickly everyone forgot about Nadab and Abihu, and that takes place in Leviticus chapter 10. Why did they think that their venture was going to end differently? It didn't. All right, so that's round one. Ding, 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 ding. The bell rung, and Moses and Aaron are the only ones left standing. They won round one. Now, it's interesting that Korah and his crew was burned up. But not all of Korah's family died in this incident. Because I'll have you know that 10 of the Psalms were written by the sons of Korah. Those sons that saw Korah die and saw that rebellion fizzle out and be burned out, they're like, we're going to learn a lesson from this. We know who we are. We know our station. We know our place. They became psalmists. Not only did they carry the furnishings of the tabernacle, but they became psalmists. And they wrote some of the most dedicated, loving, devoted songs to God that you would ever want to hear. I just want to give you one example of the Psalms of the sons of Korah. So Psalm 47, I think, would be a very appropriate psalm. Psalm 47. So these are the descendants of Korah who started this rebellion. And I think that their words kind of sum up what their attitude is, that they learned their lesson. It says, for the music director, a psalm from the sons of Korah. Clap your hands, all you people. Shout to God with a voice of joy. For Adonai Elyon is awesome, a king over all the earth. Sounds like they know where their place is, right? Sounds like they know who is in charge. He subdues the people under us, a nation under our feet. He has chosen our inheritance for us, the glory of Jacob, whom he loved, Selah. God is gone up amidst shouting, Adonai amidst the sound of the shofar. Sing praises to God, sing praises to our King, sing praises, for God is the King over all the earth. Sing praises with a skilled song. God reigns over the nations. God sits upon his holy throne. They know they carried God's throne. They carried the Ark of the Covenant. The princes of the people are gathered as a people of God, of the God of Abraham. For the shields of the earth belong to God. He is greatly exalted. Sounds to me like the sons of Korah learned their lesson. You wouldn't get them to rebel even if you paid them. So, Moses and Aaron won, rebels 0. The second rebellion, the firstborn versus Moses. And that takes place back in Numbers chapter 16. So in verses 12 through 15, or verse 12, let's read. It says, Then Moses sent word to call Dathan and Abiram, the troublemakers, the one that ratted Moses out in Egypt, supposedly, allegedly, the sons of Eliab. But they said, We will not come. Dathan and Abiram's refusal to come when Moses called was sending a message to Israel that, number one, they didn't accept Moses' authority any longer. He's not the boss of me. We're not going to do what he says. And number two, it said to the children of Israel, we're not afraid of Moses. We're not afraid of him. So again, the firstborn forfeited their leadership rights, Reuben because of Bilhah, and the firstborn of all of Israel because of the worship of the golden calf. So here, Dathan and Abiram are just showing their utter contempt and disdain for Moses and his leadership. All right, so verse 13. Isn't it enough that you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey? What? Dathan and Abiram said, isn't it enough that you, Moses, brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey? No, they're going to a land of milk and honey. What's this land of milk and honey they're talking about? They're calling Egypt milk and honey. They're calling Egypt the promised land. They're calling the land of their bondage, their slavery. They're calling that the promised land, the land of milk and honey. Isn't it enough that you brought us out from a land flowing with milk and honey only to kill us in the wilderness? And now you would lord over us? What's more, you haven't brought us into the land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us an inheritance of fields or vineyards. Would you now gouge out the eyes of the men? We won't come. He's like, you're not pulling the wool over our eyes. We know what your scam is. You just brought us out in the wilderness to die. You just want to be dictators and despots and rule over us until we're all dead. Basically, they're blaming Aaron and Moses for not fulfilling their campaign promise. It wasn't Moses who promised to bring them into the land of milk and honey. Moses and Aaron didn't say anything about bringing them into that land. They said God will bring us into the land flowing with milk and honey. So they're making a false accusation against Moses. And on top of that, they're blaspheming God, calling the place of slavery that they just came from a land flowing with milk and honey. I mean, what hubris, what audacity. So here I wrote, claims Moses and Aaron failed in their campaign promise when in actuality, the cause of the failure of Canaan's conquest was by refusing to take the land when the 10 spies brought back their report. Moses and Aaron didn't renege or go back on any campaign promise. It was Dathan and Abiram and the rest of Israel who failed. They had a chance to take the promised land. They had a chance to go to the land of milk and honey. But because they said, nope, there's giants there, we're not going to do it, it's their fault. But yet they're trying to pin it on Aaron and Moses. Have you ever met somebody like that who does something wrong, blatantly, outright done something wrong, and then try to say, no, not my fault, I didn't do it, it wasn't me. It is your fault. You're the one who told me to do this. It's your fault. Yeah. My goodness. Unreal. So this is the second rebellion, the firstborn versus Moses and Aaron. So we'll go to verse 23. Verse 23. Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the assembly and say, move away from the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Moses got up and went to Dathan and Abiram. The elders of Israel followed after him. And he warned the assembly, saying, move away from the tents of these wicked men. Don't touch anything that is theirs, or you will be swept away because of their sin. Kind of reminds you of Achan. Don't touch anything don't go into Achan's tent. Don't touch anything that Achan has touched. Don't take anything that Achan has taken, or you're going to end up like him. What happened to him? He was stoned to death because he rebelled against God. So it says, don't touch anything that is theirs, or you will be swept away because of their sin. So they moved away from near the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came outside and were standing at the entrance of their tents with their wives, their children, and their little ones. Moses said, by this you will know that Adonai has sent me to do all these works, that they are not from my own heart. I'm not making this up. It's not my will. It's God's will that I'm doing. If every one of these men die a common death and experience what happens to all people, then Adonai has not sent me. But if Adonai brings a new thing, and the earth opens her mouth and swallows them and everything that is theirs, and they go down alive into Sheol, which means the grave, which means hell, then you will know that these men have despised Adonai. As soon as he finished saying all these things, the ground split under them, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them along with their household and all of Korah's people and all their possessions. They went down alive. They were buried alive. They went down alive into Sheol. Could you imagine hearing their screams, even when the earth closes back and still hearing them screaming? They and everything that was theirs, the earth closed over them, and they were gone from among the community. Just like that. 1 Corinthians 15:33, bad company corrupts good morals. So, verse 22, what does Moses and Aaron do again? Verse 22, but they fell on their faces and cried out to God, O God of the spirits of all flesh, if one man sins, will you be angry with the entire community? Again, Moses and Aaron intercede on behalf of the children of Israel. They don't harbor ill will towards the rebels or those that are trying to usurp their authority, because they realize they're not really coming against Moses and Aaron. They're really coming against God. So again, Moses and Aaron, round 2. Moses and Aaron 2, the rebels 0. Round 3, ding, 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 all of Israel versus Moses and Aaron. So we go to verse 41. And it says, the next day, like the next day, like they didn't learn their lesson from the day before. The next day, the entire community of Bnei Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And what did they say? You killed Adonai's people. It's your fault. The men that had the censers were burned up because of you. Korah and Dathan and Abiram went down into the earth because of you. It's your fault. What is one of the titles of Satan? Is he not called the accuser of the brethren? And that's what all of Israel was doing. They were acting as if it's Moses and Aaron's fault, when indeed the children of Israel brought all this upon themselves by their rebellion. Isaiah 5:20 says, woe to those who call good evil and evil good. I don't have these written down, but I'm just going to turn there. You don't have to turn with me. But Proverbs 19:3 says this. Proverbs 19:3. A man's folly undermines his way, and his heart rages against Adonai. You do something stupid and you want to blame it on God. You get yourself in a mess and in a pickle, or something don't turn out your way, and all of a sudden you're saying, God, that's not fair. Why did you do this to me? And God's like, not my fault. You did it to yourself. It was your boneheaded, dumb decision, not mine. This is how God feels about men who rebel and want to blame it on him. In Psalm chapter 2, perfect example. One of my favorite Psalms. Why are the nations in an uproar, and the peoples mutter vanity? The kings of the earth set themselves up, and the rulers conspire against Adonai and against his anointed ones. Sounds like the children of Israel conspiring against God and against Moses and Aaron. Verse 3, let's rip their chains apart and throw their ropes off us. That's what the children of Israel are saying. Let's get a new leader. Let's forget about these guys. It says in verse 4, this is how God reacts to that. This is how God reacts to man's rebellion against him. He who sits in heaven... It says, he who sits in heaven laughs, and Adonai mocks them. Oh, let's get a new leader. Oh, let's rebel against God. I mean, that's what God's doing on his throne. So he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them with his fury. I have set up my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will declare the decree of Adonai. He said to me, you are my son, and today I have become your father. Ask me, and I will give the nations as your inheritance, and the far reaches of the earth as your possessions. You shall break the nations with an iron scepter, and you shall dash them in pieces like a potter's jar. So now the kings be wise. Take warning, O judges of the earth. Serve Adonai with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he become angry, and you perish along your way. Since his wrath may flare up suddenly, happy is everyone who takes refuge in him. Wow. And then, before we leave this section of Scripture, I think of what is written in Job chapter 15. Job chapter 15, verse 25 reads, for he raises his hand against God and flaunts himself against Shaddai, against the Almighty. That not only describes the children of Israel and their rebellion, it describes our world today and right now, that they're rebelling against God. Here's a perfect example. Biblical Judeo-Christian conservative values is what's being blamed for bigotry, racism, intolerance, homophobia, Zionism, school shootings, and the pandemic. We're being blamed for that. It's our fault if we just went along with the program, if we would just do what the godless men of this world and their governments want, then why can't we just be nice and play along? Why can't we just shut up and be wallflowers and just go get with the program? Because they're not our rulers. They're not our king. God is our king. And when they go against God, we have to go against them. But yet, because of our biblical Judeo-Christian conservative values, we're being blamed for all the evil that's in the world. This kind of reminds me of an example of when I was serving this rabbi at the synagogue. And I came early to kind of set up and prepare for the service. The rabbi was already there with a woman that was demon-possessed. He's sitting there praying over her and everything, and the deliverance was happening and taking place right at that moment. And as soon as I walked in, she turned her head towards me, and that person wasn't behind the wheel. That person was not at home. Somebody else was behind those eyes. And you know what this lady said to me? "It's all your fault." I said, "No, it's not, accuser of the brethren." She jumped up, starting to head towards me. We had a decorative sword in the synagogue, and she grabbed that sword. I was like, oh boy. I was like, I can't show fear. So I stood right there and I said, "You're not going to harm me in Yeshua's name." And she could not do anything. And we continued on with that deliverance. But she wanted to blame all of her problems on God. It was all God's fault for what she was going through and suffering. But she brought all this stuff upon herself because of her own rebellion. This is exactly what happened with the children of Israel. So let's jump to verse 46. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Take the censer and put fire." Okay, so what is happening here is all the children of Israel are rebelling against Moses and Aaron at this point. And a plague has taken place, and people are dropping like flies. And so people are associating the incense with death, because Nadab and Abihu died, because those 250 men died, and their censers were put into sheets and put on the altar. So it says, "Then Moses said to Aaron, 'Take the censer and put fire in it from the altar and put incense on it. Get going and hurry to the assembly and make atonement for them, because the wrath has come out from Adonai and the plague has started.' Aaron did just as Moses had said and ran into the middle of the assembly, and behold, the plague had already started among the people. But he offered the incense and made atonement for the people, and he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. However, there were 14,700 dead from the plague, besides those who died because of Korach." I don't know if I would have done that. Again, Moses and Aaron stand in the gap on behalf of the rebels. I would have said, "Okay, God, just kill ever who you want. Let's thin the herd here. Let's only have the righteous people left and remain. They've already used up all their chances, God. Go ahead." I'm not sure I would have said, "Hurry, get the censer and go and save these people who want to kill us and stone us and choose another leader." I'm glad I wasn't Moses and Aaron. I probably wouldn't have reacted the same way. So Moses and Aaron never try to get revenge or ask God to get them. They never hate their enemies, but forgive them and pray for them, just as Yeshua commanded. And this is before the New Testament was written. But just as Yeshua commanded in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. I want to remind everybody of that passage. It says, "But I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you." One of the hardest things that I do on a weekly basis is watch the news, hear some stupid, boneheaded diatribe from the world leaders that be, and I'm thinking, God, why can't you just strike them down? I mean, they're idiots. Like, they're rebels against you. Nothing good's coming. But instead, the Lord's like, pray for your enemies. I love them just as much as I love you. I am not willing that any should perish, but all should come to repentance. Are you sure, Lord? Not just this once? Could you take these guys out? No, I love them as much as I love you. And that's something I have to work on. It's hard for me to love my enemies. And they're not my direct enemies, but their actions are corrupting the entire nation, which makes me angry because it's taking away from the Judeo-Christian roots and foundation our nations were founded upon. And the Lord says, pray for them. That's one of the hardest things I have to do on a weekly basis is pray that God spare them, that pray that if at all possible, God would save them. that they would repent and turn from their wicked and evil ways. And that's the example that Moses gave. They were following the New Testament before it was even written. So, Moses and Aaron, round 3. Rebels, 0. So here's the final round, the championship round. They didn't even make it to 5 rounds. They only needed 4. And we see that Moses and Aaron come out triumphant. So in Numbers, chapter 17, verses 1 through 11. So this is the tribal leaders versus Aaron and Moses. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Bnei Israel," that is the children of Israel, "and get a rod from each ancestral house, 12 staves in all." So we have to assume here that Ephraim and Manasseh were combined as the tribe of Joseph, because Levi was included in this 12 rods. So if you had Ephraim and Manasseh and Levi, you would have 13 tribes. So Ephraim and Manasseh were combined as the tribe of Joseph so that Levi could participate, so you'd still have 12 tribes. "Speak to the children of Israel and get a rod from each ancestral house, 12 staves in all, from each prince among the ancestral household. Write each man's name on his staff, and write Aaron's name on Levi's staff, for there is to be one staff for the prince of each tribe. Then you are to place them in the tent of meeting, before the testimony," that is, before the throne of God, the Ark of the Covenant, "where I meet with you. It will come about that the staff of the man I choose will sprout." So we're talking about something impossible here. We're talking about a staff that's been severed from whatever tree or whatever root for decades. It's just a dry walking stick at this point. "I will rid myself of the grumblings of Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, who grumble against you." In other words, this is once and for all, I'm going to settle it. Once and for all, this is going to determine who I've chosen. If it wasn't enough that I chose you in round 1, if it wasn't enough that I chose you in round 2 and round 3, round 4 is going to be the final deciding, and everybody's going to live with this decision. So Moses spoke to Bnei Israel. Each of the princes gave him a staff, 1 staff for each prince according to their ancestral house, 12 staves in all, and Aaron's staff was among them. Moses placed the staffs before Adonai in the tent of the testimony. The next day, Moses entered the tent of testimony, and behold, Aaron's staff from the house of Levi had sprouted, blossomed, and produced almonds. We're talking overnight. Moses then brought all the staffs, so it's something that couldn't be faked. Moses then brought all the staffs from Adonai's presence to all Bnei Israel, and they looked, and each man took his staff. Adonai said to Moses, "Put Aaron's staff back in front of the testimony to keep it as a sign to the sons of rebellion, so that it may put an end to their grumbling against me, so that they will not die." Moses did just as Adonai had commanded. All right, so you have the staff, which each tribal leader had a staff. It was basically what we would call a scepter. It was a symbol of power, authority, and rulership and leadership. It was a staff that was passed down from one son to the next, one generation to the next. And so these staves they know every grain, every twist, every knot of the staff, because this staff has been passed down through all of their lines. So there's no way that the staff could be faked. They knew who was their staff. But just to make sure, they wrote their name and their tribe on that staff. And so they put it in the tent of meeting. Now, you've heard me say this before, but according to legend and tradition, I can't back this up or authenticate this with scripture, but according to legend and tradition, the staff of Levi, which was Moses' staff, which was the staff that was used to part the Red Sea, that was the staff that was used to bring about the plague, that was the staff that turned into a serpent. This supposedly was a branch from the tree of life itself. When Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden, God allowed Adam to take a branch from the tree of life as his patriarchal staff. So we can assume that the tree of life was an almond tree. Why do we assume that the tree of life was an almond tree? Because that's what the menorah gave light to the tabernacle, right? It was modeled after the almond tree. That's all the menorah was. It looked like a tree with branches, 7 branches. It had blossoms and almonds and buds and cups and everything. So that was the tree of life. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil happened to be a fig tree, because the fig tree was the only tree that gave Adam and Eve leaves for covering their nakedness after their sin. The rest of the tree says we're not participating. And it's the only tree in Scripture that Yeshua cursed. So again, I'm not dogmatic about that, but I think that's pretty interesting circumstantial evidence. So Aaron's staff produces almonds. So let's see. So verse 10 says that this staff is placed before the throne. So not only do you see the people see the bronze plates on the altar to remind them of that rebellion, to remind them who's in charge. Every time Korah, the sons of Korah, took down or was getting the furnishings and transport the furnishings, they probably saw Aaron's rod that was left in front of the Ark of the Covenant to remind them who's the leader, who's in charge, who God chose. So again, this is round 4. Moses and Aaron 4, rebels 0. So they were declared the champions. It was forever settled. Aaron and his descendants are the high priest. Moses and his successor are the national leaders. The pecking order of the tribes and the leaders and the government structure, the 70 elders, were settled forever. And even today, that's what happens is you have the Sanhedrin, which is the 70 elders. Israel knew its place and role and its place in leadership. Now that has a lot to say to us in our modern day. We're far removed from the children of Israel. We're far removed from the wilderness. But yet these has lessons for us. When God has called and chosen somebody to lead a people, that's who God has chosen. Even if they are making wrong decisions, you pray for them. You don't rebel against them. That's exactly what David did. He could have taken Saul out numerous times, but he didn't. He says, God's going to take them out. God's going to take him out because he's God's anointed. I have no right to set myself against God's anointed. Yeah, I know I'm going to be king, but my time will come. I'm not going to let it come by David's hand. I'm going to let it come by the hand of the Lord because he says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. So every one of us in the body of Christ needs to know our place, needs to know what our calling is, what our function is, and not try to supersede or go above or beyond that calling. And sadly, there's churches who have done that. Boards of management have assumed the role of the pastor, and they try to be the censor or the leash to the pastor, when they're the ones who are supposed to be supporting the pastor because God called the pastor to that church, not them. They're to support, just like the 70 elders were to support Moses. So a great passage, and we'll end with this, on learning our place, is to study and read 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Rav Shaul, the Apostle Paul, he says it very beautifully. Now, concerning spiritual gifts, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be ignorant. You know that when you were pagans, you were enticed by idols that cannot speak, and you got led astray. Therefore, I make known to you that no one speaking by the Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God, says Yeshua be cursed. And no one can say Yeshua is Lord except by the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. Now, there are various kinds of gifts, but the same Ruach, the same Spirit. There are various kinds of services, but the same Lord. So we all have to know our place in the body of Christ and our function and not go beyond that. There are various kinds of workings, but the same God who works all things in all people. But each person is given the manifestation of the Ruach, the Spirit, for the benefit of all. For to one is given through the Ruach a word of wisdom, to another a word of knowledge, according to the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the one of the same Spirit. Now, if you have words of knowledge, don't go around trying to heal somebody. But if the Lord's called you to be an agent of healing, don't try to give words of knowledge. Know your place. Know what your function is. Like, I'm a teacher. I'm not going to pretend to be anything else but a teacher and a preacher. To another by faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the same Spirit, to one workings of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another different kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But one and the same Spirit activates all these things, distributing to each person individually as he wills. For just as the body is one, but has many parts, and all the parts of the body, though many, are one body, so also is Messiah. For in one Ruach, one Spirit, we are all immersed in one body. Whether Jewish or Greek, slave or free, we are all made to drink of the same Spirit. For the body is not one part but many. If the foot says, since I'm not a hand, I'm not a part of the body, Is it therefore not a part of the body? If the ear says, since I'm not an eye, I'm not a part of the body, is it for this reason any less part of the body? If the whole body were an eye, like Mike off of Monsters, Inc., where would the hearing be? If the whole were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But now God has placed parts, each one of them, in the body just as he desired. If there were one part, where would the body be? But now there are many parts, yet one body. The eye cannot tell the hand, I don't need you, or turn the head to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be less important are indispensable. Those parts of the body we think to be less honorable, we clothe them with greater honor, and our unpresentable parts are treated with greater modesty. But our presentable parts have no such need. Rather, God assembled the body, giving more honor to those who are lacking, so that there may be no division in the body, but so that the parts may have the same care for one another. If one part suffers, all the parts suffer together. If one part is honored, all parts rejoice together. Now you are the body of Messiah and members individually. God has put into his community first emissaries. Okay, this is the fivefold ministry. I believe that personally every rabbi or every minister has a portion of these 5 spiritual offices. So it says, God has put in his community first apostles. Here it says emissaries, same thing. Second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, then healings, helps, leadership, and various kinds of tongues. So apostle, prophet, pastor, teacher, evangelist is the fivefold ministry. I think that all ministers or all congregational leaders have some of the fivefold. Maybe they have one, they might excel in one office or one gift more than other. I definitely excel in teaching and preaching more than prophecy. And if you've been around me and been in some of the service, I have prophesied over people before. But that's just rare, that's not my main thing. But we all have different capacities for those gifts as leaders. All are not emissaries, are they? All are not prophets, are they? All are not teachers, are they? All do not work miracles, do they? All do not have gifts of healing, do they? All do not speak in tongues, do they? All do not, and see that all do not speak in tongues. Well, you have to speak in tongues to be saved. Right there, that should tell you, no, you don't. Oh, yeah. Paul said that's the least of all gifts, and yet there's been whole denominations that have been built on, you got to speak in tongues, you're not saved. It's not what it says here. Do all speak in tongues? No. Do all interpret? Do they? But earnestly desire greater gifts, and still I show you far more better ways. So 1 Corinthians 12 should kind of teach us and show us that we all have a place in the body of Messiah, and we should be content where we are. If we desire greater gifts, God will probably send us greater gifts or expand our territory, expand our calling. Doesn't mean that what we're called to do now, he'll always keep us there. Because, he says, what's that, to the parable of the talents. To those who are responsible over little, I'll make him responsible over much. So if you show yourself faithful in what you're doing, the Lord will say, okay, this person's ready to be bumped up to the next level. So, but it's like a clock. We're all different cogs and gears and springs. And we all have to work together or it's not going to work. All right, let's go ahead and close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you that when people come against us, they spread rumors about us, gossip about us, slander us, try to discredit us, try to destroy the ministry that you've given us, that we don't have to worry one bit about it. We don't have to even fight back. We don't have to say boo, because it says you will vindicate us. You are our defense. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. The only thing we need to do is fall on our faces and say, Lord, be merciful to these people that are coming against us. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's a hard one for me, Lord, and I know you're working on me with that. So, Lord, help us to be gracious. Help us to be humble. Help us not to fear of the opposition that comes against us, but sit back and watch you defend us and watch you vindicate us. Forgive us of our sins and our failures and our shortcomings. And we love you and we praise you. And we'll end with the Aaronic blessing. Yavarekaka Adonai Vishmareka. Ya'er Adonai panav eleka ve'ekuneka. Yasa Adonai panav eleka ve'asem leka shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Bashem Yeshua Moshienu. In the name of Yeshua our Messiah. Amen.